But
I prefer to think of you as a winner, not as a loser.
Okay, go ahead, Senator.
Let's hope I finish strong eventually. So, thank you again, Madam Chair and members. This is a bill that we passed out of this committee and out of the Senate last session, and I'm assured it will do better in the House this time. As you recall, certain fundamental religious documents have been an undeniable role in the history and tradition of our country. Until the 1971 Supreme Court decision, Lemon versus Kurtzman, America regularly acknowledged the role that these fundamental religious documents and principles have in American heritage and law. One of the most recognized sets of foundational principles were the Ten Commandments, which for over 200 years were displayed in public buildings across the United States, including in schools, government buildings, and courthouses, including the U.S. Supreme Court building itself. For the last several decades, however, expression of that heritage has been restricted. The court's decision in Lemon v. Kurtzman, which created the Lemon Test, was the culmination of separationists' fight to eradicate all references to religion from the public square. Litigants like the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and the Satanic Temple used the Lemon Test to block as many displays of America's religious heritage as they could, including the Ten Commandments displays and veterans memorials. One of their largest upheavals came from the 1980 Stone v. Graham decision, in which the Supreme Court used the Lemon Test to strike down Kentucky's law requiring the Ten Commandments to be displayed in public schools. Prior to Stone v. Graham, many public schools displayed the Ten Commandments. After Stone v. Graham, public schools across the country removed their Ten Commandments displays. Now, however, the legal landscape has changed. In Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, the Supreme Court overturned Lemon, eliminating the Lemon Test and instead looking more appropriately to America's history and tradition for whether the government may recognize our religious heritage. Unfortunately, after over 50 years of Lemon's rule, many of the traditional recognitions of our religious heritage have been removed and are only now slowly returning. Many government officials still fear the ghost of Lemon and are afraid to display these historical documents after years and years of being told such displays are impermissible and un-American. Therefore, legislation is needed to ensure the return of these displays, like the Ten Commandments, which have an undeniable historical meaning in our national history and heritage. The solution: Senate Bill 10 would require Texas public elementary and secondary schools to display the Ten Commandments in each classroom. At present, Texas public schools have no such requirement. Senate Bill 10, as I said, is similar to the bill I filed last session, which was Senate Bill 1515, which passed out of the Education Committee and the full Senate, but it has one main difference. Senate Bill 10 clarifies that, and by the way, we thought it was kind of cute, SB10 and Ten Commandments, but anyway. Aside from that, Senate Bill 10, better, yes. Senate Bill 10 clarifies, I should not have digressed, I'm sorry. Senate Bill 10 open the door. Senate Bill 10 clarifies that a public school is not required to purchase displays using district funds. In other words, it's not an unfunded mandate. Now, Louisiana has already passed legislation requiring the display of Ten Commandments in public schools, and at least 14 other states have introduced similar legislation. It is time for Texas to pass SB10 to bring back the historical tradition of recognizing our national heritage and to help eliminate out-of-date legal thinking still living in 1970s Establishment Clause jurisprudence. SB10 restores those liberties that were lost and reminds students all across Texas of the importance of a fundamental foundation of American and Texas law, the Ten Commandments. And Mr. Chairman, there are several invited witnesses here today that will provide wonderful testimony with regard to jurisprudence, with regard to our history, and to the moral fiber, really, upon which American law and culture was built. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator King. Members, are there any questions of Senator King? Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir King, in the bill, I haven't had a chance to go through it word by word, but do you prescribe that every classroom has it, or do you leave it to the discretion of the school district?
It requires that each classroom, K through 12.
K through 12. So kindergartners, first graders, second graders, are we asking just for the posting, or are you expecting the instruction of what they mean?
Well, I think good teachers will instruct that as part of their social studies, their American history course, things like this. And in fact, tying it into Texas history, the wording we chose is the exact wording that is on the monument that's on the grounds of the Texas Capitol. And that monument and that wording has already been approved, was tested all the way up through the U.S. Supreme Court and passed even under Lemon.
So then we're going to have K through fifth grade, let's say these young classes. We're going to be explaining to them what committing adultery is. On line 6, it says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery."
Well, and I don't want to try to correct what the Bible says, but I know that kids are reading the Ten Commandments in Sunday schools from the time they're that age. And I know when I grew up, the Ten Commandments could be displayed in public schools. And I think our kids are just crying out for moral clarity. I think they're crying out for a heritage to hold on to. I know that in the school where my son-in-law teaches, there were 2 children shot in the parking lot just last week. There was another shooting in that same school the week before. And I think the kids in our schools are crying for clarity, crying for moral clarity, and understanding our religious heritage in America and in Texas, I think helps embed that. And so, yes, I hope K through 12, they see that same thing on every classroom wall every day they walk into the classroom, and they understand, hey, those words are important. They're important for our culture and our morality.
Well, I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you on the fact that our young people need to have moral clarity. They need to have an understanding of right from wrong. They need to have that. I personally don't have a problem with these words. The issue that I have is the fact that we're choosing, you talk about our history. I mean, our history in this country is I believe, more than one faith. You and I have a strong record of supporting a lot of folks of the Jewish background and other faiths. And so I just wonder that how we pick and choose which documents. And, I feel, there are words in here as I look at, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant." I don't understand what a manservant or a maidservant is. So, it'll be interesting to see. I appreciate you taking my questions.
Well, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Senator Hagenbu. Turn your mic on.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Senator King, thank you for bringing this bill, and thank you for the chance to sign on with you. I think it's very, very important. Based on what you said about the overturn of Lemon, essentially the Supreme Court said that was a wrong ruling. This is a correction of that, essentially, right? It was corrected, and this gives us a chance to restore historical, something we had in our history in schools before. Essentially, it's a restoration of it. It's not something new necessarily put in there. We're restoring something that was there once before that was thought to be a good thing, that I think is a good thing. Is that accurate then?
Yeah, I think my expectation would be that somebody will file a lawsuit the day it becomes law, and some judge will issue an injunction, and then hopefully it'll work its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that bad law of Stone v. Graham will be overturned.
And just a quick follow-up is, I appreciate that. you said something about it was once considered to be un-American, but based on the history in this ruling, it seems to me there couldn't be anything, and based on what I know about the Founding Fathers, nothing more American than to include the Ten Commandments and a recognition of what we have even in over the top of the dais in the Senate is on God we trust. It's on our currency. Seems like it's right in line with being very American. Do you agree?
Well, there's going to be some great testimony on that, and just a little bit about how the Ten Commandments helped shape our whole Western civilization. It began with our moral code, and then ultimately became the basis of much of the legal system that we have in place in Texas and the United States today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hagenbu. All right, members, we're now going to have a layout of Senate Bill 11 by Senator Middleton, and then we will have our invited testimony come up. Go ahead, Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 11, we passed this in the Senate last session in this committee and off the Senate floor. Also hopeful that it'll have a better chance through the House this time. I think definitely that's the case. And what this bill does is it puts prayer back in our public schools during school hours. And as we know, we are a nation and a state built on In God We Trust. That's above our Senate dais. It's above our House dais. We begin each day in prayer in both chambers. And our constitutional free exercise clause is about religious liberties. And this bill expands religious liberties in our public schools. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Patrick for making prayer in public schools a priority this legislative session, as it always has been for him. Senate Bill 11 authorizes school districts to adopt a policy to provide for a period of prayer and the reading of the Bible or other religious texts during school hours. And in Texas, our schools are not God-free zones. This bill outlines a framework that school districts may use if they vote to allow a period of prayer and Bible reading or other religious texts, which they may use to ensure compliance with our state and federal constitutions, as well as existing case law on the subject. The framework requires that students or faculty who wish to participate in a period of prayer or religious reading of religious text must submit a consent form, and the period must take place out of the physical presence and hearing for those of whom who have not submitted a consent form. Senate Bill 11 is about providing space for free expression of religion in our public schools and open enrollment charter schools. And this bill does not make participation of prayer or reading of religious text compulsory. The period provided under this bill does not replace or supplant any elective courses or classes that a student may take as part of their education. It's simply meant to allow a time for students and faculty to freely express their faith. And we have to ask this question when we're thinking about this. Are we better or are we worse off as a state and as a society since prayer was taken out of our public schools? Right. And I think we all know what the answer to that is. The reality is that when prayer was taken out of our schools, things started to go downhill in America. And we know that the cornerstone of a good education is always going to be reading and math. But character and values matter too. After all, our children spend much of their time in the school building and in the classroom. And as we know, our founders certainly never intended separation of God from government. The recent Coach Kennedy case, Kennedy versus Bremerton, Coach Kennedy is here with us today, debunked the false doctrine of separation of church and state, and that you can't simply be coerced into participating. So under the Coach Kennedy case decision, coercion is the new test that replaced the Lemon test that Senator King talked about. Now, in the 1960s, the federal courts legislated from the bench and let a few decide for everyone else whether we get to freely exercise our faith and pray. Well, in Texas, no longer are we going to let a group of litigious atheists decide for everyone else whether or not students and educators get to pray. And with this bill, we are righting a wrong that began with the American atheists in the 1960s. Now, this language in Senate Bill 11 is nearly identical to what we passed in Senate Bill 1396 during the 88th regular session. And it also includes Senator Paxton's floor amendment from last session, which clarifies that a period of prayer is not a substitute for instructional time And it also protects student prayer if a school board does not adopt this policy. In other words, if they're already doing it, it doesn't prohibit it. And the one change that we've got from Senate Bill 1396 into this bill is that it contains the resolution language for school boards to vote on. And with that, I yield for questions.
Thank you, Senator Middleton. Senator West, question.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Senator Middleton, as it relates to, let me tell you where I am. I'm on page 2 of your bill. And more specifically, as it relates to opting in or opting out of this, for a parent to opt in or opt out.
Right.
How do we make certain that parents, let me back up again, school districts are required to come up with a policy to advise parents at least, or employees, as to what this particular bill means, correct?
Right.
How do we make certain, here's the question, how do we make certain that they fully understand the ramifications of this without prescribing some things that should be in the policy?
Right. So obviously the first step is that the school district has to vote their way into it. So you're assuming they do that. And if they do that, one of the important provisions in this bill is they work with the Attorney General to develop that consent form, right? Because one of the requirements in this legislation is that if there's a legal challenge, that the Attorney General's office will defend the school district. And that's the important part here, where it allows a universal form to be developed for this whole state. And I think that will, of course, allow parents to better understand what they're opting into, because it should be the same between each school district.
Where's that in the bill, maybe?
So towards, I believe, the page 3, in that it allows the school district to work with the Attorney General's provide a model consent form that may be used for the purposes of providing consent under subsection B1. So that's page 4, sorry, not page 3.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Middleton, I was just curious, you have in the in the bill, it says here, period of prayer and reading of the Bible or other religious text. What defines a religious text, or who gets to define what other religious text would be?
So that's up to the district.
So the district would get to define or decide what.
Right. And if a parent, parents don't like that, they can always opt out. So there's a clear opt-out provision here, where if they're not happy with whatever that is, then they don't have to participate, and they can revoke their consent to having their child participate in this period of prayer.
Do you envision that any school employees be required to be trained, or how do we prevent potentially some sort of bullying of kids who maybe are of different faiths? So let's say the school's primarily overwhelming, let's say 80-90% Christian, but there are kids who are of different faiths, and they're maybe they might be feeling left out or looked down upon. Do you perceive or feel that this could be creating a problem?
No, I mean, our laws against bullying are still there. Those still exist underneath all of this. So, and it is voluntary. The kids don't have to do this. They can go to their mom or their dad and say, "Look, I don't want to do this anymore." And withdraw the consent. It's withdrawn. You're done. So it's pretty simple. This is parental consent is what this centers around. And that's a lot of what we do in this committee is focusing on those parental rights and a parent's ability to decide what their child is doing or not doing in school.
Do we in the bill, does it define how much time the period is? Is there a time length on the?
No, it just can't replace instructional time or count as instructional.
So it adds to the day.
It could potentially add a little bit to the day.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Senator Bettencourt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And really, Senator Middleton, I think the question I have for you, this is really about trying to bring faith-based reasoning back into the schools.
Yes.
Right, and the simple answer is yes.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Right, because you brought up the concept of you've got, obviously you've got math, you've got reading, you've got, science, history, everything else, but the essential ingredient that you're trying to bring back is simply the need for faith-based reasoning.
That's right.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
free
you, Senator
exercise of student and faculty's faith. What it's about.
Senator Hagenbu.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Follow-up question, the thought about sort of bullying, those kinds of things. The fact that we have that and it's sort of prevalent to me is an indication of a lack of moral training for children to some degree, right? And seems to me that teaching principles out of the Bible, for example, like love thy neighbor, could actually help rather than hurt that, hurt something like bullying, and give them a basis for understanding that's wrong and not the kind of thing that we want to be doing. Does it make sense?
I totally agree. You know, our school districts have, by and large, been kind of the burden's been placed on them to act as the parent more and more and more and more. So we've discussed a lot in this committee, you know, obviously the basics of reading and math. But this session, we've talked a lot about those character and values like Senator Paxton's bill and some other bills that we had last week, and that is very important in K through 12 education. And that's what this emphasizes, those character and values, especially in light of how school districts are often sort of expected to fill a role as a parent would.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Hagenbu. Members, any other questions? Okay. At this time, we will now open public testimony. We will have invited guests first who have 5 minutes to give a testimony. The chair calls up Matt Krause, David Barton, Tim Barton. And as the witnesses are making their way forward, I'd like to take this time just to remind panelists to state your name for the record, who you represent, your position on the bill for the record at the start of your remarks. Members, I think we will go through the panel, listen to their testimony, and then ask questions at that time. That being said, go ahead, Matt Krause, or state your name for the record.
Thank you, Vice Chair Campbell. My name is Matt Krause. I'm with First Liberty Institute. I'm here to testify on behalf of Senate Bill 10 and Senate Bill 11, and we are for both bills. And First Liberty Institute is the nation's largest organization dedicated solely to defending and advancing religious liberties in our country. And we're thrilled with Senator King and Senator Middleton bringing these great bills. Senator King, I thought, did a great job laying out the how we got to where we are, from the Lemon case to Coach Kennedy to where we are now. And I think it's really worth driving home that Stone v. Graham case in 1980 was a per curiam opinion. And as you know, a per curiam opinion means that there was not one author of that opinion. It was not one justice saying, here's what we think, here's why we think it. They just all kind of joined. And usually per curiam opinions are 9-0, 8-1. It's usually when there's a lot of agreement. This time it was 5-4. And so it was a very interesting set of circumstances that said Kentucky could no longer put the 10 Commandments up on their classroom walls. We've thought it was wrongly decided for a long time. And thanks to Kennedy versus Bremerton, we now have an opportunity to go back and revisit that. I won't get into too many of the details on Kennedy versus Bremerton because I think there's somebody in this room who could probably do a better job than I could on that. But suffice it to say, the big takeaway was that the Lemon test was thrown out. And if you want to know why it was so convoluted, why we needed to get rid of Lemon and replace it with this history and tradition test, we need to look at 2005 with the Supreme Court decision in Van Orden v. Perry, which allowed our Texas 10 Commandments monuments to stand. On the exact same day, the Supreme Court issued another opinion on another 10 Commandments display out of McCreary County, Kentucky. That display was just a piece of paper amongst a lot of other historical documents, and the Supreme Court came down and said, because of the Lemon test, we're going to allow the big granite monument sitting on state grounds to stand, but we're going to not allow this one document, this piece of paper amongst a bunch of other historical documents. That violates the Lemon test. It was convoluted. It was hard to understand. You didn't really know where the court was going. So now that we've gotten rid of that, we have the history and tradition test. And as you're about to hear, there's really nothing more historical or traditional in our country's history than the 10 Commandments. And so I think we have a lot of confidence that the courts at some point are going to say, this is constitutional, this is allowable under the history and tradition test. And you might have heard that Louisiana's law did get challenged and it got struck down. But what a lot of people failed to understand is that was one district court. There's a reason they filed that lawsuit in the Middle District of Louisiana and not the Western District of Louisiana. We're very confident that when it goes up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, that decision will be overturned. And it's also important to note that even though the Middle District of Louisiana, which has about 5 or 6 of the parishes in Louisiana, they're not allowed to put up the 10 Commandments, Other parishes in Louisiana are, and they're preparing to do that right now. So there's solid legal ability, solid legal standing to put forth SB10 into law. In regards to SB11, as Senator Middleton was talking about, you did have that opinion in Eagle versus Vitale in 1962 where the Supreme Court said you couldn't have this prayer at schools. Now, I want to distinguish it a little bit because now in 2025, the court is taking a much different look rather than hostility to the Establishment Clause. We're looking more favorably on the free exercise element of that First Amendment. And so with this new court, with the new makeup, I'm very confident that such a measure as SB 11 could survive constitutional scrutiny. And one other thing that I think is important to note is that SB 11, it's optional, right? In Ingle versus Vitale, New York Board of Regents said you have to read this prayer every day. It's optional and all those kinds of things. But here it's purely permissive. And so I think what you're going to see as this new court with its understanding, with the history and tradition test, its adherence to more of an expressive free exercise approach to the law, you're going to see SB 11 on firm constitutional ground as well. I'm happy to take any other questions, but Senator Hagenbu, I thought you hit the nail on the head. A lot of times we talk about the status quo, and we think the status quo is no 10 Commandments in the classrooms. We think it's no prayer in the classrooms, but really that's a pretty recent invention in our nation's history. And in the law, you have the status quo ante. Let's go back to what the status quo was before this new status quo. That's what SB 10 and SB 11 are seeking to do, and I think it's good. I think it's right. I think it's legal, and I appreciate y'all hearing this bill today.
Very good. Thank you. And we'll ask questions after everybody finishes their testimony. I don't care which direction we go, so
I'll take it,
Dad
Senator.
or son. Okay.
David Barton with Wall Builders, here to testify on behalf in support of SB 10 and SB 11. And as Matt just covered, the history and tradition test is what the court has now given us, which is the way it had been prior to that period of 40, 50 years of difference on the court. And particularly with the 10 Commandments, it's hard to find anything more historical and traditional. We have a collection of more than 100,000 documents, 2 world-class museums up in the Fort Worth, Dallas area. And I brought some of those documents, but the first textbook ever published in America was in 1690 in Boston. It's called the New England Primer. It was used in public schools throughout America all the way into the mid-20th century. So over 200 years, this happens to be a 1777 copy of that little first grade textbook. This textbook here, and we call it first grade. They didn't have grade levels in, but this is where you started. This is where you learned to read. It has 43 questions for first graders on the 10 Commandments. So that is the starting textbook for America that was used for several centuries. Another major textbook series came from Noah Webster. We know him for Webster's Dictionary. Webster was a soldier in the American Revolution. He was a judge and a legislator afterwards. The dictionary he did, but many textbooks also. He's called the Schoolmaster to America. This is his American history textbook. And in the back of this is a section called Advice to the Young. And in that he covers the 10 Commandments, how important the 10 Commandments are in American history and in culture at that point in time. Beyond that, the next major reader would be the McGuffey readers. Came out in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. This is the second reader. The second reader has several lessons for second graders on the 10 Commandments. So the books I've just mentioned talk about the Bible as the source of the 10 Commandments. So the Bible is the best-selling book in American history. Noah Webster's works are the second best-selling book in American history, and the McGuffey Readers are the third best-selling book in American history, and all have the 10 Commandments. So a lot of history tradition there. Going to SB 11, when you look at the use of scriptures in schools, going back to something as those early textbooks, but even a man named Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He ratified the Constitution. John Adams said he's one of our 3 most notable founding fathers. He started the first Abolition Society. He started 5 universities. He's the primary doctor in America, called the father of American medicine. But he did this work in which, in 1790, he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. He pointed out that in our public schools, we would not take the scriptures out. That is the foundation. He gave more than a dozen reasons we would not remove the scriptures. This is a piece that was actually reprinted in 1831, talking about that piece he did on a dozen reasons we would never remove the scriptures from our public schools. This is a work done by a man named Fisher Ames. He's a framer of the Bill of Rights. He actually is the man who wrote the First Amendment language in the House of Representatives. And in this, he has an essay on how we must never let the scriptures get pushed to the back of the classroom in public schools. That has to be part of what we teach, as part of our culture, part of our traditions and histories. And then this happens to be a Supreme Court decision from 1844. It originated in Philadelphia when a government-run school there decided they weren't going to allow the scriptures at the school. And the Supreme Court, in an 8-0 decision, said, no, if you're a government-operated, government-run school, you will not exclude the scriptures from your school. And so that was our previous history and tradition until we came to that 1962 case, Ingle Vital and Aberdeen Ship and Murray Collette, 3 decisions in 12 months. The court said, we don't care how it's been for the last 2 centuries, we're doing something different. But now we're back to the way it had been before. So that would be SB10, SB11. The other things I'd point out is if we start saying that these 10 Commandments have no place in classrooms, then we need to cancel our 8th grade trips to Washington, D.C. Because when we go inside the Supreme Court, I personally have counted more than 50 copies of the 10 Commandments displayed inside this 10 court, depictions of the 10 Commandments. So do we tell kids they can't go in the Supreme Court, or next door to the Library of Congress where Moses is holding the 10 Commandments, or across the street to the Capitol where outside the doors of the House chamber are posted the 10 Commandments, or down the street to the National Archives where the Constitution and Declaration displayed and the 10 Commandments depiction in the same room. So all of that is there. I would also point to the fact that the Constitution, the Declaration mentions God 4 times. The 10 Commandments mention God twice. If we're going to say we can't do the 10 Commandments, we've got to say we can't do the Declaration, because that's twice as much God mentions we have in the Declaration. And final thing I'd point out is that we have 50 states that all have what are called Good Samaritan laws. Now, Good Samaritan laws are not just based on a religious teaching, they're based on a Christian teaching. It's found exclusively in Luke 10, and no one challenges those laws. It's part of our culture, part of who we are. So the presence of religion is not a disqualifying factor in any way, shape, fashion, or form, and that's our history and tradition.
Thank you very much. That's a lot in 5 minutes. Wow, that's awesome. Go ahead, Tim.
My name is Tim Barton. I am from Wall Builders. I'm speaking in favor of SB 10 and 11 as well. So, Madam Chairwoman and committee, it's a pleasure to be with you. Following up on some of the thoughts, knowing that there is now legal standing, there is now a history and tradition, and we could go through a lot more history and tradition. I'm going to give a couple examples as well. One of the things that as we talk about public education is apparent for everybody, even as Senator King pointed out, with having family members that are at a school and there were shootings at a school. One of the things that we are seeing is there's a challenge for a rising generation in determining right and wrong. Where oftentimes in public education, we are saying, well, you have to find your truth, and what is your truth? And the reality is there's some major challenges, because if we would ask what would seem like a rhetorical question, is killing wrong? We would say, of course, killing is wrong. But who determines? It used to be there was a very clear moral standard that we could point to that was objective beyond the whim and the feel of the individual. And so even from a moral standpoint, looking at the fact that right now we know that one of the high death rates for young people is gun violence, often related to gangs. And there's levels of irony when we would have kids arrested for breaking the 10 Commandments, and yet have, in some reason in culture, determined that it's inappropriate for kids to see the 10 Commandments, the very things they can be arrested for violating, not following. In fact, even things when we came to testify, we had to check a box, a disclaimer to say we're going to tell the truth in our testimony. Well, guess where that came from? That idea that you're supposed to not bear false witness in giving testimony, that's part of the 10 Commandments. Very much the culture that we live in has been shaped by those morals, and the decay that we are seeing in culture around us has been directly connected to the removing of a moral standard. This is definitely something that should be restored. That's for SB 10. SB 11, this is a book called the Aiken Bible. It's also known as the Bible of the Revolution. This was the first Bible printed in English in America. It actually was printed with the approval, the authorization, and the endorsement of Congress, because up until this point in America, Americans were not allowed the privilege of printing Bibles. It was something that England controlled really since King James came out with the King James Bible. In England, the Anglican Church said, we will control the Bible market, and no American was allowed to print Bibles in the English language. And the Revolution Revolution, there was a Bible shortage. And in the midst of the Bible shortage, Robert Aiken, who was the official printer of Congress, went to Congress, and they understood in Congress, there was a petition back in 1777 that they would import 20,000 Bibles from Holland or some friendly nation. It was approved by Congress, but because of the Revolution, they weren't able to bring those Bibles in. Robert Aiken, the guy who did all the printing for Congress, went to them and said, okay, I know we haven't been allowed to yet, but I've been working on a project. If we're separating from the king, could we maybe print a Bible? Well, this is the Bible that came out in 1782. And in the front of this Bible, and by the way, this Bible, there was only about 10,000 that were originally printed. It's considered one of the rarest Bibles, not just in America, but in the world. There's only a couple dozen left in known existence. The majority belong to the Smithsonian or Library of Congress. We've been very blessed that we have one I brought with me today. And in the front, it actually has an endorsement and recommendation. It says, the United States and Congress assembled highly approve the pious and laudable undertaking of Mr. Aiken, the printer of Congress. But then I'm going to jump down a line or two. It says, and they, Congress, recommend this edition of the Bible to the inhabitants of the United States. So the first Bible printed in English in America came with the approval, the authorization, the endorsement of Congress. But what's more interesting is Robert Aiken, when he made his petition to Congress on why they should do this, he said, we have a Bible shortage in schools. And if we could print a Bible in English, this Bible, and this is from his records, the journals, the annals of Congress, it was, quote, a neat edition of the Holy Scriptures for the use of schools. Congress not only agreed to approve it, they then endorsed. The reason we have the first Bible in English in America was in part so that we would have it in schools. And I know that there's probably going to be people that would come and testify and say, wait a second, but separation of church and state, you can't have religion in schools. This second document is the first printing of George Washington's presidential prayer and Thanksgiving proclamation. This is a newspaper from 1789, and he called on the nation to a time of prayer. And for people that would say, but you have to separate church and state, George Washington was the president of the convention that gave us the Constitution. He understood it pretty well. He's the one who is presiding over things as we become a nation, and he's the one, along with many founding fathers, that followed up with these traditions. The reason it matters, the founding fathers believed in separate institutions, but not secular institutions. The very idea from the Declaration was that there's a God who's given us rights, and government's job is to protect those rights. To pretend like we can't acknowledge God, well, then we're risking losing those God-given rights. And this is why we are very favorable of support of SB10 and SB11.
Thank you very much. Do you have any other books we didn't cover? Those are all so impressive. I have them under lock and key. You do?
I've got one for Texas.
Okay.
One related to Texas. You mentioned Perry Van Orden, the 2005 case under Governor Abbott actually argued at the Supreme Court. And in 1956, the movie The Ten Commandments came out. Cecil B. DeMille started Paramount Studios. That the commandments came out. This is actually the handbill. Anyone who went to the theater got this handbill. Inside the handbill, it says, hey, there's 32 million human laws, and they all rest on the 10 Commandments. So right up front, you can see what's inside. After this did so well, Academy Awards swept the nation, they said, we need to do something to help really keep this in culture. They put 10,000 copies of 10 Commandments up in classrooms, no lawsuits at all. They made 180 marble monuments and brought them to places like Texas. Our marble monument here in Texas was actually erected in 1961, and Charlton Heston, who won the Academy Award, was the guy who dedicated the marble monument. So literally that monument we have outside that's been through the Supreme Court was the product of Cecil B. DeMille and actors like Yul Brynner and Martha Scott and Charlton Heston going to all these state capitals and making sure the 10 Commandments were there. So that's related to Texas specifically, as our 10 Commandments monument came right out of the movie.
Well, who would have thought? All right. We're trying to bring some sanity back to our little tangent to our movies and movie production in Texas. So maybe they'll think back with Cecil DeMille
Cecil DeMille
and the 10 Commandments. Members, questions for this esteemed panel? Yes, Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank y'all for coming today. I love the history that y'all bring with this, and I think that's important to point out. So in the Kennedy v. Bremerton case, could you maybe talk a little more about how one of the important rulings was that the Establishment Clause must be interpreted by reference to historical practices and understandings. So that goes back, to some of these documents that you brought here today.
It really does. The Establishment Clause was following up a European practice. One of the things, actually, there was an 1892 Supreme Court decision. It was the case of the Holy Trinity, and it was dealing with religion. And one of the things they pointed out is that in order to understand a law, you should determine the evil that was intended to be remedied, right? What problem were they trying to solve? And most people don't understand the problem the Establishment Clause was trying to solve, that the reason so many early settlers came to America, they were fleeing religious persecution in many situations, because at that time in England was Anglican. And if you weren't Anglican, there was a law in England that you could not meet in religious groups or gatherings or talk about God or Jesus in public if there were 4 or more people, because that would be trying to establish some kind of religious sect or group or church. It's the reason the Pilgrims left and went to Holland. It's the reason the Puritans finally left and came to America. It's the reason that William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, he's a Quaker. He got arrested so many times over in England for not abiding by the Anglican laws that were passed. But this was happening too. In Germany, you had to be Lutheran. In Italy, you had to be Catholic. And so when we are forming a nation in America, part of the context leading up to the Establishment Clause was we want to make sure that the government can't mandate everybody has to practice this specific way. So we can't say everybody has to be a Baptist, everybody has to be Presbyterian or Methodist or whatever it was. They said, no, we're not going to let Congress establish a religion. But the context also was that the Congress can't prohibit any of our free exercise. So they can't tell us we can't worship, but they also can't say we have to worship in a certain way. But this is very different than the way it's interpreted today, because today it's been largely interpreted that if you believe in God, you're trying to establish a religion. Well, that's totally opposite of the origins of the Establishment Clause, of the problem, to quote the 1892 Supreme Court decision, the evil they were trying to remedy was not keeping people from mentioning God, which is why I just brought one proclamation, a prayer proclamation from George Washington, 1789, but we have hundreds of these original proclamations. By 1815, there were more than 1,400 official government-issued prayer proclamations from the New England states alone. Every single founding father who went on to become a governor or president issued prayer proclamations. So this idea that you can't have any kind of religion or you're establishing a religion, it's a modern misnomer from a misunderstanding of history and a misapplication of the Constitution.
Senator, if I may add, one aspect of that is a legal aspect as well, because when we were looking at the 10 Commandments, we went into Westlaw, did the legal searches. All of our legal people went back and found hundreds of cases, state and federal, that cited the 10 Commandments as the basis of that law. I found it interesting that the court, and they weren't citing the 10 Commandments as an add-on. It was, hey, because the 10 Commandments says this is why we have the civil law. And they specifically, I remember they pointed to laws against cattle rustling. Laws against cattle rustling as being specifically based on the 10 Commandments. They said laws against election fraud were based on the 10 Commandments. Laws against white-collar crime, laws against defamation. So much of the culture that we have legally was based on their understanding of what the 10 Commandments prohibited in the way of bad behavior, and that's why we have the civilized culture we do have. So that goes to that concept of religion, that the presence of God or religion is not prohibited by the Constitution. Setting up a particular national denomination is, and that's how we got from there to saying that, as Matt pointed out, that you can't even let kids see the 10 Commandments. That's a crazy place to be. But now the court has taken that good step back.
Yeah, and you pointed out a good point on the historical context of it, because obviously the thing that I was referencing in my layout of the separation of church and state, that's not in the Constitution anywhere. The only thing people can cite is the Jefferson letter to the Danbury Baptist, but then you look at that in the context, and he was issuing prayer proclamations, right? So clearly, however, modern lawyers are interpreting this and acting like that's, basically twisting that, was not how they saw it and how he saw it, in his time with his contemporaries. And I think that's why this, according to historical practices and understandings in this ruling, is so important, as it reaffirms that. So thank you.
If I can just add on, it was a huge paradigm shift in Kennedy versus Bremerton. For a long time, we had looked at it where it was kind of like, you kind of have to prove that this kind of religion is okay, right? But now, after Kennedy, it's almost like you're giving the benefit of the doubt to the religious practice. It's only if it doesn't comport with history and tradition. And I think a lot of times you hear on these kind of bills, well, if we're going to open it up for the 10 Commandments, are we going to have to open it up for this and this and this and this? there's no other document really in our country's history that comports with the history and tradition like the Ten Commandments does. So any other kind of religious reference or any other kind of document, even if I agreed with it, probably would not survive that constitutional scrutiny because it doesn't have that history and tradition. And Senator Menendez, just on the mechanics of SB 11 that we were talking about earlier, I would encourage you to look at the religious release time programs that we have even in Texas right now, set up a lot similarly to how SB 11 is going on right now, but release time lets you actually go off campus. And so you had all those kind of concerns and hesitations at first, but even going off campus, those programs have worked, they've been viable. So I think that would be a good roadmap to look to see how those have been effective. I think you'll see the same thing with SB 11, and the mechanics of it will actually flow pretty naturally.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this question may be more for Chairman King on the Ten Commandments. Does the bill speak to how the schools receive them? Who do they get delivered to campuses, central office? How does the mechanics of that work, just for safety purposes, that sort of thing?
Well, for safety purposes, I hadn't thought of. I mean, I presume they would just be going through whatever type of security protocols the schools has for any type of interaction or delivery. But so it doesn't mandate that the schools spend money on them. It does say the schools can spend their own money, but it also says that if they're donated, they're to receive those. But it's very prescriptive on what it's to say and the size of it and the size of the font so that it can be readable across the classroom. And we also just didn't want anyone playing games with it and adding in additional words or things like that.
Right.
After all, it kind of was written in stone. Sorry, somebody told me that the other day. So. Thought that was cute. I heard it.
Yeah. Lightning struck the rock. Yeah, they broke in half, yeah. I wanted to thank you for the dialogue you had with Senator Middleton on the Establishment Clause, and because that's a concern that I have that, one of the biggest concerns I have is that it gives the appearance that we're as the government, the state government, establishing in our public schools, we're choosing a particular faith. That is the endorsed faith. And so my fear is that we alienate children of different faiths and teachers of different faiths and others, and I don't feel that that's appropriate. I think that we, obviously I believe in God. I was raised, my parents a certain way, and I don't have a problem with any of the things you've said in terms of my choices. What I don't want to do is impose them on other people, and that's a concern that I have. That's one of the fears that I have, that we're taking our public schools and maybe creating a Sunday school environment, if you will.
Yeah. And if you'll allow me to respond to that, I think first of all, the Ten Commandments are prominently held in high esteem in multiple religions. So I don't think just by placing the Ten Commandments on the walls, you're picking one religion over another. And so I think that helps against the Establishment Clause concerns, because even if it's not Judaism or Christianity, many other faiths have incorporated several of the Ten Commandments, if not a lot of the Ten Commandments, into their faith tenets as well. So I feel like that guards against that. Secondly, again, it's the reason it would pass constitutional muster is because it's the history and tradition of America. And so when you're looking at it, it's not so much if a child asks about, hey, what about this tenet or what about this principle? It's not so much a religious discussion as that's because our country was founded upon the principles that were embedded in the Ten Commandments. And we can see that as we move from the Ten Commandments to Roman law, to German law, to the English common law, to Blackstone's commentary, to what our founding fathers put in there. You can trace that lineage. And so it really does have that history and tradition feel to it. So I understand the concern. And having served with you, I know you're sincere and genuine. It's not just something just you're contemplating. It's something you feel very deeply, and I appreciate that you're thinking hard about these things. But I do think, just from a purely legal perspective, from the establishment argument, there's so much to those Ten Commandments that it would be hard to say you're trying to establish one religion, since it's so ubiquitous in many faiths.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any other questions? Appreciate you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Sure good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, members, with no other questions, we will call up the second invited panel. The chair calls Coach Joe Kennedy. And Richard Vega.
Get your own mic.
Pastor Vega, you can begin.
I'd like to thank you, Chairman, and the Senate Committee. My name is Pastor Richard Vega, and I'm for both Senate Bill 11 and 10. I'm here to testify on both of them. I just want to say that, you know, from a pastor standpoint, prayer is extremely important in our faith and throughout our community. And I'd have to agree with all of you guys. We have come a long ways in our country and our state, and we've come along off the path. Our students, our kids, and our communities are suffering, and it's our job to be able to help guide them back into a path in which they should go. I think that personally that the prayers back in schools is extremely important, and it goes back, as you heard. I don't know why we're after those guys. I mean, my goodness. But George Washington, the prayer of the Valley Forge. I mean, there's a picture that is displayed on that, and what are we going to tell kids? That he's just taking a knee? Or that he didn't take all the bullets that came through his jacket? What about when President Lincoln did a proclamation on April 30th, 1863, to say that it was a day of prayer and fasting? To come together across the country, a president of the United States saying, hey, we need to pray for the Civil War and the healing of our lands, and to be able to grow from where we are, to be able to go into where we need to go. Abraham Lincoln had the wisdom of that to be able to say, hey, we need to pray. He also prayed for the victory of Gettysburg. He asked for the people of the nation to pray against the sins of this nation, to forgive this nation, so we could be able to go to where we are today. I don't know if he understood. When I was sitting here looking at all of this, and I started understanding a little bit prayer a little bit more, there was a world-renowned neuroscience named Andrew Huberman. He started developing and understanding the science process, but he wanted to be able to pray. And what he started to understand that as through prayer, he started to heal. Well, we know that in the faith community, that's the number one thing that we're supposed to do. I sit down with a lot of broken people that are going through marriage issues, trauma issues. Recently, the shootings in our own local community with the two kids that got shot in our local area. We have a very major concerns within our community, and prayer is so much needed. Not a moment of silence. We're done with moment of silence. We need things to be released in the atmosphere to create change. People need to be able to hear things. Let me break it down to you. We have an issue within our church and through all churches because only 25% of students today has walked into a church, has been to church. That's scary because there's a moral compass that is being lost. With the 10 Commandments coming back in, it at least helps guide and ask the questions of ones that might not have faith on what those are and what does it mean, that aren't getting taught at home and don't have that. I wasn't raised like that. But I tell you what, when I started to understand it and I fell in love with Jesus Christ, I started to understand what was going on within my own self to help remove things. These prayers back in schools will help many, many kids. One of the things that these doctors started understanding in the neuroscience was that when you started to pray, it activated the frontal lobes, bringing more blood to the brain and allowed them to be able to focus more. It also allowed them to encourage themselves. It also allowed them to be able to heal within the inner healing and understanding that there is something that is a higher power than us, than just self, and not caring just for ourselves, but others. Releasing love. There's nothing wrong with the blessing of prayer, releasing love and joy and happiness, gladness. Releasing blessings over a church. Let me tell you, I hope that not only that this bill passes, but I hope that teachers that have faith are able to pray in schools. We have come so far off the beacon path that our communities are ripped apart in this country and in our state. And you guys have an opportunity to push this forward, to help us, the ones that are working the community, to create change. For us to go to our school districts and be able to be that voice within our communities to get these things in our schools so we can start creating change within our own community. I'll leave you with this. My dear friend, Coach Kennedy, he has fought for us. He's taken bullets. He's went up. He's had taken some losses, and he's been challenged at many different things. And because of him, we are allowed now to challenge over 8,000 lemon cases in this country. Over 8,000. And I hope that the men and women of God will rise up and start to be the voice that they've been called to be, because it's time that we do. Thank you.
That's good. Members, any questions? Coach Kennedy.
Hi, I'm Coach Joe Kennedy. Thank you for having me here. I wish I was distinguished like everybody else that came up here prior to this, but I'm just a high school football coach. I'm a former Marine. I served in my country since I was 17 years old. I wanted to become something more than myself, and that was to stand up for the Constitution of the United States. And it meant more to me than anything else. Then I had my calling after serving in combat and in peace to support and defend the Constitution. I became a high school football coach, and I found what people call faith. Now here's an opportunity for years later that we have an opportunity to actually rectify things that have been messed up for very many years. I take a look at all the time I was coaching, and the one guy that's not even in here I wanted to talk to, but it was people have so much fear over religion, and that's not what our education system is about. It is about educating our kids. And the whole opportunity that people have to actually pray and to see the Ten Commandments, these are the fundamentals that we have had since the beginning of our country. So as a Marine, I could not understand why I came up to this point where I was fired, having to choose between my faith and my job. Nobody in America should ever have to do that. Now, the superintendent of my school district, he still, to this day, is a very dear and close friend of mine. He goes to the same church as I do. We have the same beliefs as we do. But he was in fear because of somebody took away his right to stand up for what is right. I don't expect people like him giving up 37 years of his life over a 15-second prayer in high school. I understand where somebody would be afraid to do that. But me as a United States Marine, and for a coach of young men to teach them to become better young men and stand up for what is right, this is my opportunity to be able to show them that you always stand up and you do what is right. If it's not popular, it doesn't make any difference. Just because church and state, we all live under this weird fear thing of establishment clause. I hated that thing. That thing drove me nuts, hearing that crammed down my throat for 8 years while I fought. I didn't just fight for me. I fought for everybody in my school district. I fought for every kid on my football team. I fought for every American, and I will continue to fight for that. The basics of prayer, there is no place right now in there where it says that we can pray at school. That's the problem, is that somebody took that right away from us. And now I get to look at the people in this room, in your eyes, to actually have the ones to correct what was screwed up from before. You guys will be the ones to correct the thing that happened in the past. So you have an opportunity for both of these bills, and I'm just a simple guy, simple Marine, but I know the difference between right and wrong, and you guys have an opportunity to protect people, instead of worrying about the thing of the Establishment Clause, but to enforce the freedoms that is guaranteed to us. There's nothing that is guaranteeing players and coaches and principals and superintendents, lunch ladies, all these people, they don't have the opportunity to have a moment of prayer in public school. That's un-American. That is not what the First Amendment says. This just rectifies that, and that you guys give us the right under the First Amendment for the free exercise. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Coach. Members, any questions? Senator Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, what an honor to be and in the presence of both of you gentlemen. What an incredible testimony you gave today. Both of you, Pastor, appreciate all that you had to say. I mean, I'm in shock. The stat that you threw out, that only 25% of our kids today in schools have been in a church, that should make everybody listening absolutely scared to death. I mean, obviously, only the Lord can save us, and we need to engage in prayer. But to realize that only 25% of our kids in schools today have been in a church is absolutely horrific, and something that we all need to work on to address. And then to you, Coach, so good seeing you earlier today. I so enjoyed our visit. Thank you for being a national hero and giving us a platform to be able to move forward with religious freedom, to move forward with the 10 Commandments, to move forward with prayer. What you've done for this country, because you were not afraid to stand in the gap, will make all the difference for generations of Americans. So I just want to thank you for all that you've done, for both of you, and all the great testimony today, for being a part of supporting this legislation and getting our package collectively done in these bills to restore religious freedom and restore prayer ultimately in Texas. So thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Chairman. Coach Kennedy, I saw you earlier today, but just want to reaffirm how grateful I am for your persistence and your grit, because there was a lot of times over that 8 years where you were challenging that in the court system that you didn't think you were going to win. You didn't know you were going to win. No one else knew you were going to win. Only he knew you were going to win. That's right. And you persisted in it. And because of that persistence, everyone gets to benefit from that and being able to exercise their faith freely. So thank you. Thank you for that on behalf of all Texans, all Americans, of course, nationwide victory on that. And appreciate you. And Richard, you were here last session, Pastor Vega, on this bill and some other bills. And I remember that day when y'all came up here. It was a group of mainly from Pasadena, and you gave really some incredible testimony. Know you personally very well. You're a champion for this issue. Could you maybe tell us a little bit how prayer has impacted your life personally?
Yeah, absolutely. So 3.5 years ago, I lost my son. He was 19 years old, a tragic car accident. Now, I'm a man of faith, and I sit down with a lot of families, some tragedies. I buried a lot of kids. From fentanyl. I mean, we're not even on the border issue, but when something like that happens, it crushes you to the core, and you dig deep within yourself. There was no words that my wife could say, my other children, my own pastor. There was nothing that my mom could say. There was nothing that anybody could say. But I remember walking into my restroom, and I shut the door, and I crumbled like a baby crying out to God. And the only thing that got me through was prayer. The only thing that I knew what to do and how to do was to clench on through my prayer. That was the only thing that could get me through my day, was to rush the heavens and try to touch his garment. And so when people walk into my office, crumbled and crushed, all the time, the first thing I say is, can we pray? Because I know the power of prayer, not just because of what I've been taught or what I'm told to tell people. It's because of my personal experience and what it can do. I want to say this one last thing, Senator, is I'm grateful for this bill. And I'm grateful for both of you and all of you that are standing on the religious liberties that we so much cherish. But let's make one thing very clear, that this nation and this state is a Christian nation. It was founded on Christian values. The first 13 colonies, 9 of them had to proclaim their faith of Jesus Christ. And if other religions can come and worship freely, there's nothing wrong with that, because we have that freedom here. But we are a Christian nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Senator King.
And thank you both for being here, and great, helpful testimony. Coach, and I don't want to put a plug in for this, and you certainly didn't, but I know they made a movie about your experience, and I think it was called Average Joe.
Yes, sir. Average Joe.
And I was just going to tell you, if you hadn't watched it, I had to pay $3.99 on Amazon or whatever it was to download it.
Amazon Prime.
It's a Prime. That's what it was. And it's an excellent movie. And not just because it was really well done. I mean, very well done. But it also, it just told that story. And as you listen to it, not only did you learn, did it explain what you went through and your family, your wife went through, and the whole experience, but it also just gave a lot of history about where we are in America and where we need to be. And it told a lot about what kids need in their life. I just thought it was a very inspiring movie. And so I have no idea if you had any role in it at all. I know you didn't have a formal role, but I don't know if you had any part of that. But it was very well done. I thought it was very inspiring. I thought it told a great story that really everybody ought to see, particularly young adults.
And I really hope that everybody does watch it before you guys make all these decisions, because one thing we do need to stand up for is what is right. And the First Amendment's very clear. And I don't know who took away all the things, the 10 Commandments. Those were way before any of our time. But you guys are the ones that are going to be the ones to rectify it. So thank you for that, and God bless you guys.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate that, Coach. Senator Hagenbu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here. I sure appreciate your testimony. I want to ask a question to the coach, but just to set it up, Pastor, you expressed the importance of your faith in your life and what it's done for you. I know for me as well, faith in Christ. We were talking about the founders in the previous testimony, the founders of the country, and today on the Senate floor, we recognize the independence of Texas. I want to read you something, and I want to ask you a question. This is from Stephen F. Austin. He's writing a letter to his sister, Emily Perry, in 1831. He said, "I hope you will impress on the minds of your children the importance of religion and morality. It's the only sure foundation for happiness in this world and the next." Based on that and what we know in our own lives, to be able to express our religion helps ourselves and other people, right? But you mentioned that your superintendent was afraid, really, and many others are. And I think that what in this country over the last many years, many people have been afraid and thought that they couldn't express their faith in public places and that kind of thing. Do you think that in passing these, beyond this, their specific purposes of 10 Commandments and the opportunity to pray, that beyond that, it will alleviate that fear and allow people to feel more comfortable in expressing their faith, which can be very helpful in theirs and other lives?
I absolutely do. I take a look at the whole entire left coast from Washington on down through California, and it's a little bit different than Texas. And this is like one of the last free states out there. And there's a reason I'm moving my family to states like this, is because we do have the opportunity to have that freedom. And you nailed it on the head that it's just sad that we've been under the guise for so long of fear of we're not including so-and-so or whatever. I mean, there's a million reasons why we could come up with reasons to remove God out of our common language. But it absolutely will put that back in there where it says, I have something I could point to. And here it says right here that I do have the right to pray. I do have the right to my faith. No matter what that faith is, it gives you the right to do it. And that should embolden people to be able to do that. And it's especially with diversity, equity, inclusion, you name all the little buzzwords that you can hear going on today. That means everyone, and it should embolden everybody to stand up for their faith and be proud of who they are and not have to hide their faith just because they're in public.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we've had an esteemed group of panelists come before us today, those that can support historically and legally why we can have the 10 Commandments, prayer in our schools. Examples of the pastor talking about faith and prayer. The coach, a Marine who went to the trenches. And because of your victory, there's going to be multiple victories. And God tells us in Joshua 1:9 to be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged, because the Lord thy God is with us throughout our life. We get wrapped up in our day-to-day life. And as I get older, that's passing seems quicker and quicker. But there is an afterlife. There is eternal life. And if we don't expose or introduce is a better word, our children and others to that, when they die, they had one birth, two deaths, because they will know nothing about the afterlife, the eternity with God. But exposing them or introducing them to 10 Commandments, prayer, it asks other questions. And they then have a choice in their future. 2 births and 1 death. And this is what we're doing. Prayer gives us our faith. The 10 Commandments, while they are laws, actually expand our freedoms. That's what we're about. Thank you very much, and thank all the panelists we've had today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senators Middleton and Senators King, for bringing these 2 bills forward.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Any other questions? Appreciate both of you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, at this time, members will open up for public testimony, and the chair will call Liz Case Pickens, Andrew Hendrickson, Jessica Kane, Monty Exter.
Chair Creighton, if I could ask a clarifying question, we'll have 2 minutes on both of the bills.
Well, we've laid them out together, so yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's 2 minutes total.
Right. That's
Yeah,
what I meant.
yeah,
That's
yes.
understood.
Got it. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Hello, Chairman Creighton, members of the committee. Thank you for having me today. My name is Andrew Hendrickson. I am with here representing the American Civil Liberties Union of Texas. We are opposing both SB10 and SB11. I know we heard a lot now, and I had planned on 4 minutes here, so I'm just going to try to hit some key points here. I wanted to just distinguish a few things about the 10 Commandments bill to start with. No court in the last 50 years has found that displaying the 10 Commandments has ever been held constitutional. I think that it's really important to note that the reason for this is that the free exercise clause of the First Amendment is violated in 2 ways. It usurps a parent's constitutional right to decide what resources, what religious doctrine, if any, is instilled in their children, and it causes an unconstitutional religious coercion of students. As the Supreme Court affirmed in Mr. Kennedy's case, government-imposed religious messages at schools can be problematically coercive because students are legally required to attend school. The court upheld Coach Kennedy's right to pray after games, in part because students were not compelled to be present. The same cannot be said of the government promoting religious beliefs, which students might feel pressured to adopt in classrooms where they are forced to be. Students have a right to engage in voluntary, student-initiated religious exercise and expression, but there's a stark difference between that and the government-imposed religious message that would be foisted upon them day in and day out by SB 10. Many religions do not consider the 10 Commandments part of their faith, nor are they venerated by non-religious families. Even among religions that adhere to them, there is significant disagreement as to their specific text and meaning. On SB 11, all Texans, including students, have a right under current law to pray, read scripture, and practice their faith. But the U.S. and Texas constitutions make it clear that it is incumbent on individuals, not the government, to decide when and how they pray or exercise their faith. I think if there's any doubt about the problematic nature of this bill, it is most evident in the removal of the prohibition on encouraging students to pray. Decisions about when, where, and how to pray left to parents, students themselves, and faith communities. And I guess that's my...
That's good. Thank you. Go ahead.
I actually thought we were laying these out separately, so I'm going to let them skip me, and I'm going to run back there and get my other testimony so I can meld them together.
That'll be fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Pastor Jessica Kane. I'm a parent and a trustee in the San Marcos School District, and I'm here to testify against both these bills. The Eighth Commandment says, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." And in his explanation of it, Martin Luther says, "Therefore, this commandment is given first of all, that everyone shall help his neighbor to secure his rights, and not allow them to be hindered or twisted, but shall promote and strictly maintain them." I heard here these commandments were written in stone, but we have them on paper in Hebrew in two separate places in our Bible, and they are different in those places. Different traditions number them in various ways. Which translation will we be using? Which numbering system? Which is the accepted one? Tomorrow is Ash Wednesday in the Christian tradition, and our text for the day comes from Matthew 6, where Jesus says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward." School is a place of learning, but it's not a place for teaching one faith. That is properly the work of churches and parents in the home. Children and adults in schools are already more than welcome to pray and study the Bible at school, at sports games, at Meet Me at the Pole events, but they should not be required to do so. It is our duty as Christians to serve, care for, and secure the rights of our neighbors, especially those who would be harmed by having the religion of others imposed upon them in public education. These bills go against both the principles of our government, which John Adams declared was not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, and the principles of our faith, and should not be passed out of this committee. Thank you.
Monty Exter with ATPE. We're here only on SB10. I want to start by being very clear that our particular concerns, as we are not a pastoral group, are issues to do with pragmatism alone and not differences over ideology. In fact, there is little doubt, as you heard earlier, that the principles of moral legalistic system that are embodied by the Ten Commandments and Leviticus as a whole have without a doubt impacted Western and American thought. However, this bill as drafted does have some pragmatic challenges. The first and foremost simply being space. This bill, as someone pointed out earlier, does not ask us to place a document somewhere in the school, but in every classroom. For those of you who have visited classrooms, you will understand, talking to any teacher in this state, the premium that the space within that classroom holds. Additionally, Senator Menendez already brought up that there are some questions about age appropriateness, which is something that we talk about a lot in here when we talk about library books and other texts with the younger grades. And finally, the last bill that you guys heard, not today, but in your previous hearing, SB12, actually ends up conflicting with this bill in that SB12 all but bans religious instruction of any kind being done in schools outside of being done by parents. And so we think that there would be some confusion there when it comes to our educators. Our recommendations, based on those things, are to, instead of having one per classroom, have one per campus in a public space versus one per room, and that actually eliminates most of the concerns that we would have about this particular bill, while still putting the bill into practice.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Liz Case, and I'm here to testify in favor of both of the bills. In November of 1980, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the Kentucky statute requiring schools to post the Ten Commandments violated the Establishment Clause, which they said was a violation of separation of church and state. And Kentucky even required them to have in small print at the bottom that the secular application of the Ten Commandments is clearly seen in the adoption of our foundation of our legal code, and in Western civilization is the basis of our common law for the whole United States. That was the case of Engel versus Fatale. So it was ruled unconstitutional because they said the children might read and meditate and perhaps venerate and even obey the 10 Commandments. Well, mercy me, we certainly wouldn't want that. We would not want them to not lie and not be truthful, not honor their parents, and not kill. As I was doing my research for this bill, I looked at the assaults on teachers instead of looking the other way around, having been an educator myself. And in my district, I had a teacher come to me and talk to me. She's a special ed teacher, and she's leaving the profession to find another way to, she's a single mom, to provide for her kids because she had her arm broken in her classroom. And in tears, she told me she can no longer do this job because she's not protected. And I found out about a program that they have for teachers now that is a special long-term leave that can go as long as 2 years for teachers that are injured on the job. And I thought, you know, we're in a bad place when that's the kind of program that we have, that teachers are having to take long-term leave. It has nothing to do with your PTO. It has nothing to do with your sick leave. This is specifically for that kind of an injury. Doesn't cover anything psychiatric.
We're going to have to wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think both of these bills are an amazing thing, and I think they will benefit our students greatly.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Appreciate each of you. Thank you for your testimony. The chair calls Jaime Puente, Levi Fieldler, Jake Wilson, Bonnie Wallace. We'll give Mr. Puente a few more minutes to walk over in case he's in the overflow room. I know he testified earlier. We can start with you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Levi Fiedler, Political Coordinator at the Texas Freedom Network. I'm here to testify in opposition to SB 11 on behalf of myself and the Texas Freedom Network, an organization of parents, young people, faith leaders, and other Texans who support public education and religious freedom. First, it is unnecessary to affirm the right of students to pray or read religious texts. Students and school employees already have and exercise their religious freedom in this constitutionally protected manner across the state every day, including myself when I was a public school student. In an attempt to solve a problem that does not exist, this bill creates many problems of its own. Second, special periods set aside for prayer and Bible reading are inherently coercive, no matter how voluntary this bill pretends they would be. Students would feel pressure to participate in such activities. This could be in order to fit in with their peers, or to please or avoid potential negative consequences from a teacher who participates in prayer time, especially as this bill would modify the education code so that teachers would be permitted to encourage students to pray. Third, this bill leaves public schools vulnerable to expensive First Amendment lawsuits. That's true whether or not the school district is represented by the state attorney general. It makes no sense to put tax dollars at risk, particularly at a time when public schools are struggling for the funds they need to serve their students. You can protect religious freedom by ensuring public schools teach students to respect the rights of everyone. That includes respecting the student or teacher who prays with friends at lunch or reads the Bible or the Quran between classes. Just as removing the word encourage from the education code would allow teachers to encourage students to pray, it would also explicitly allow teachers to encourage them to refrain from prayer. Religious freedom is a foundational value in our state and a cornerstone of our democracy. This bill would restrict the religious freedom of all Texas students, teachers, and families. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairman Creighton and members of the committee. My name is Jake Wilson. I am from Fort Worth, and I'm testifying in my personal capacity in favor of Senate Bill 11, which authorizes school districts to establish a voluntary time of prayer and study of the Bible or other religious texts in public schools subject to parental approval, and also in favor of the display of the Ten Commandments in classrooms through Senate Bill 10. I saw that Senator Middleton said in a recent interview, "You've got to ask the question, since prayer was taken out of public schools in the 1960s, are we better off or are we worse off?" In response to the senator's question, I would say that our youth today face many challenges in society, and one book I recommend as offering a good analysis of these challenges is A Practical Guide to Culture by John Stonestreet and Brett Kunkel. Now, at least the way I understand Senate Bill 11 is that the duly elected school board members would have flexibility in how they delegate this time, whether to a group of pastors and clergy from the community or to an organization or to school chaplains, to name some examples. It is the choice of the school boards whether to adopt this time period and the choice of parents if their child should attend. The bill allows for the reading of the Bible or other religious texts. My understanding, and I hope the author will agree, is that additional Christian books, such as devotional books or Christian apologetics books, would fit within the meaning of the phrase other religious texts. Thank you to Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Senator Middleton, Senator King, my Senator Hancock, and to all the senators supporting Senate Bill 11 and Senate Bill 10. Thank you to Representatives Spiller, Hickland, and McQueenie for already signing on to a House bill similar to SB 11, which is House Bill 1425. And I hope that more House members will co-author House Bill 1425 soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Wallace.
I'm Bonnie Wallace. I'm here to testify in favor of both SB 10 and SB 11. In case no one up on the dais has noticed, our kids are in crisis mode. We've got the highest suicide rate in history. We've got school shootings galore. We've got every single week another teacher having a sexual relationship with minor students. The last time I heard Commissioner Mike Morath speak, he testified that 28% of Texas public school students do math at grade level. That means 72% are failing. And in reading, he testified 38% of students are able to read at grade level. So 62% are failing. So earlier, Senator Menendez was worried about students being exposed to "thou shalt not commit adultery." Guess what? Students are exposed to adultery in books in our schools every single day. In the book Triangles by Ellen Hopkins, readers are exposed to glamorized and trivialized adultery, along with group sex in public, sadism, masochism, and more. I will drop that book report by Senator Menendez's office. So there's also over 1,000 books that kids are exposed to: sex with animals, sex with dead bodies, extreme drug and alcohol usage, how to kill your diabetic parents. I could go on, but I don't have a lot of time. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. I serve the most magnificent God in the universe, the creator of all. I want to introduce him, to have him introduced to students. Are our students happy? Are they thriving? They're not. They're miserable. They're in crisis mode. They are so sad, despondent, anxious, and all the other adverbs. We have to do something. And so I would say that this is also for the teachers. The teachers are suffering. So please bring God back, and God bless each of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Puente.
Yes, sir. Thank you. My name is Jaime Puente, Director of Economic Opportunity for Every Texan, and we are here opposed to SB 11, SB 10. So Every Texan was founded by a group of sisters, the Benedictine Sisters of Bernie, Texas, and so we're proud of that history, and we love to maintain it. But inserting and privileging one religion in Texas public schools is bad policy because it creates an artificial divide among teachers and students where one does not need to be. After banning CRT, trying to ban books from libraries, and creating general angst amongst educators across Texas for daring to teach civic engagement, these two pieces of legislation would exacerbate the tensions that this body has inserted into the classroom since 2021. Every Texan opposes SB 10 and SB 11 because every Texan child, whether in Shallow Water or Sugar Land, Porvenir, or Plano deserves a classroom environment where they are free to learn without the state imposing a specific religion or culture of prayer. Since 2021, this legislature has used its authority to impose increasingly divisive policies on the school districts, banning culturally relevant curriculums, forcing libraries to purge undesirable books, and putting teachers into the crosshairs of overzealous critics through the new complaints process are all examples of ways Texas has inserted fear and tension into already strained classroom environments. SB 10 and 11 are two giant pieces of red meat that will further harm our schools. 5.5 million public school students in Texas. Many of them may identify as Christian. Not all of them believe in the same sect of that religion. I myself was raised Catholic. I believe that our law as Catholics is the Beatitudes, not the Ten Commandments. And so even for those who profess Christianity, displaying the Ten Commandments may conflict with what parents teach at home. While SB 10 privileges a particular sect of Christianity, the designated prayer time will also privilege a particular religion depending upon the makeup. And just one last thing, sir.
Okay, yes.
I think it's incredibly contradictory that in one moment we tell teachers they're not allowed to teach contentious subjects through social studies and other curriculums, and then say that we have to put religion and the Ten Commandments into those very same classrooms. So thank you.
Very well. Members, any questions? Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Yes, Senator Middleton?
Yeah.
Senator Middleton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Jason, thank you for being here today.
Jake, but it's
Jake,
okay.
sorry.
It's okay.
Got your name wrong there, but
No problem.
Yeah, you'd had that question, and yes, those are other religious texts, and obviously, last session we authorized chaplains in our public schools. So, of course, that is an example of either paid or volunteer chaplains could potentially lead this period of prayer. So, thank you for taking the time to drive up here today.
Thank you very much.
Senator Betancourt.
And Jason, I just want to emphasize that other religious text means other religious text. You agree?
Jake, but
right, Jake. All right.
Everyone's calling me.
Anyway, once you get a nickname, you never get rid of it.
I have a friend named Jason who has very different political views, and
You might not have agreed with me.
Yeah, but I'm Jake. Anyways, go ahead.
No, I just think that it's important to point out that Senate Bill 11, and to everyone on the panel, this is not specific to one religious denomination. This is again other religious text. It's not specific to Catholicism. It's not specific to, Judeo-Christianity. It's other religious text. Okay, so I think that's as clear as a bell you can have in Senate Bill 11. You agree?
Yes, and I think that, I think it's good that we get it on the record that Christian apologetics is included in other religious texts. So, like, just speaking for myself, for an example, if a school district is reading Lee Strobel's book, Case for Christ, or J. Warner Wallace's book, Cold Case Christianity, before school with parental approval, I think it's good to just get on the record that it was said in this meeting, apologetics are included in other religious
Martin
texts.
Luther's 95 Theses
Yes.
on the door of
Whatever,
Wittenberg. I mean, it's clearly this is an open, not a closed.
Yeah.
Right.
And something I will say just briefly, if I could, in response, 1 Peter 3:15 says that always be prepared to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. We respect everyone's freedom of religion. If a teacher, doesn't want to put up a Ten Commandments peter in her school classroom, I think someone else can do it for her or him. Also, 1 Peter 3:15 talks about giving your response in gentleness and respect. If you have a child who is bullying someone because they are of another religion, I actually think this extra period that's voluntary gives a space for mature Christians to call out that young child and say, hey, 1 Peter 3:15 says, gentleness and respect when you explain your views. And I think it creates a space to have that discussion to address that sort of bullying if it's happening.
Well, thank you, because it's a nice scripture about anti-bullying just in general. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Appreciate you. Thank you for your testimony. This time the chair calls Brady Gray, Cameron Samuels, Jonathan Covey, and Jody Harrison. Mr. Covey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan Covey, Policy Director for Texas Values. I'm testifying in favor of SB 10 and 11. First of all, and the ACLU always does this, and they show up and they try to obfuscate the reality. Students are already at times present in the classroom with all sorts of different kinds of messaging, religious music, religious symbols, religious clothing, but none of these things are considered violative of the Establishment Clause, because while people may be mildly offended, they are not coerced. And that's particularly clear now in light of the Kennedy decision, because that was the end of offended observer status. So you can usually tell the importance of a case or a certain case by the number of times that it's cited. In other substantive cases, in the first 9 months of the Kennedy decision being decided in 2022, the opinion was issued, the case was cited 69 times. That is incredible. And it has been cited hundreds of times since then. Earlier, Matt Krause mentioned Stone v. Graham, which was held in 1980, that the Ten Commandments couldn't be posted in classrooms. But the Supreme Court made it abundantly clear that through the lens of history and a closer faithfulness to the Constitution, with the test currently being used, history and traditions, Stone v. Graham would never have happened. In fact, history upholds the inclusion of the Ten Commandments in classrooms. And I can't count how many fights at the State Board of Education we've had over this issue. And finally, the Kennedy decision has given us a tool to say that the Establishment Clause does not demand that we strip out all references to the Ten Commandments out of textbooks. So as it was said before, nothing is more historically significant than the Ten Commandments, and the part that it has played in American civic society is more documented and more notable than almost any other document in history.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you. Greetings, Chairman Creighton and Senate Committee members. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify on Senate Bill 11. My name is Jody Harrison. I am an ordained Baptist minister, a member at First Baptist Church here in Austin, and serve on the board for the Texas Baptist Women in Ministry. And I'm a retired hospital chaplain. My chaplaincy specialization was in neonatal and pediatric ICUs. I also served as a youth and children's minister in 3 churches. Before that, I was the staff assistant to U.S. Senator John Tower, State Representatives Dick Waterfield, Jim McWilliams, and Dr. Bob Hunter. I strongly oppose, and personally and professionally, SB10. While Baptists are called to respect the autonomy of other Baptist churches, all Baptists are called to protect the separation of church and state. In practice, SB 11 does the exact opposite, even with its opt-out section. SB 11 inserts religion, the Bible, and prayers into public schools by law. This action violates a prime tenet of the Baptist faith. Nationally accredited chaplaincy enforces strict ethic guidelines. One guideline is to meet all people where they are, never evangelize. SB 11 lays out exactly how to evangelize one type of Christian faith over another and over all other spiritual beliefs. While this bill provides an option for parents to say no, this action alone creates a clique. Our school children do not need any more cliques. While the bill's author may have had good intentions, is it really justice to promote one type of Christianity over all school children? Vote no on SB 11.
Chairman and members, I'm Cameron Samuels. My pronouns are they, them, and I am representing students engaged in advancing Texas, a movement of young people demonstrating youth visibility in policymaking. SEAT recognizes that students are primary stakeholders in education. We deserve a seat at the table. Today, I urge you to reject SB 10. With the 10 Commandments on display, what should educators tell students who ask what is adultery? Or what it means to covet thy neighbor's wife? Amid censorship, this double standard forgets the Bible is not too different from books some seek to ban. State-sponsored religion steals from children an education teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion. The commandments say, thou shalt not steal, but this steals from children an education in which all students matter. This bill is a Texas-sized disaster to implement, requiring every classroom display the 10 Commandments. Voucher scams and the state's refusal to fully fund our public education have led to budget crises and lost opportunity for Texas students. Why should schools use their limited resources for state-sponsored religion when schools can't even keep their libraries open or bus routes running? This doesn't solve a legitimate issue Texans face and only endangers the future of our schools and democracy. Amending this bill to require the 10 Commandments be made of bulletproof Kevlar may actually be useful as a shield from gun violence, a real problem Texans face. Please vote no on this bill. Students deserve a voice in our education, and we deserve diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that means making sure that all students are welcome and belong, and that it's not just one religious viewpoint imposed upon students. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Brady Gray. I'm the president of Texas Family Project, and I will be speaking for both Senate Bill 10 and Senate Bill 11. It's been a long day, and you've heard a lot of testimony. You have my written testimony, and so I will keep my statements more brief today. We'll note that as president of Texas Family Project, I get to travel around the state and expose a significant amount of degeneracy, both in our schools and in society in general. As a side to my role as Texas Family Project, I also serve as chairman of the board for A Place for Grace Ministries that operates children's homes both in Texas and around the world. And previous to those roles, I spent 15 years in pastoral ministry. I feel like that gives me a pretty unique perspective on what the biblical principles found in our 10 Commandments can give to students in our schools. Talking to teachers across this state, discipline is a major issue in our classrooms. I've talked to dozens of 3rd and 4th grade, 5th grade teachers that say they can't even teach students. They can't worry about how to teach them how to do math or how to even read at that level because they can't keep control over their class. And so I think it's important to understand that the 10 Commandments have long been recognized as a cornerstone of moral guidance, transcending religious boundaries to embody universal ethical standards. By displaying these principles prominently in our classrooms, we provide students with a constant reminder of values such as discipline, honesty, respect, and responsibilities. These qualities are essential for personal development and societal harmony. We heard earlier from Commissioner Krause, the Bartons, as well as Pastor Vegas and Coach Joe, the implications that these have constitutionally. And we can see clearly that there's no issues in those spaces. We've heard other arguments about space on classroom walls and things like this. And as someone who has fought vigorously to see pride flags and transgender flags removed from walls, I can assure you there's plenty of room. on our classroom walls for the 10 Commandments. Thank you for your time.
Members, any questions?
I do.
Vice Chair Campbell.
Thank you, sir. Mine's more of a comment rather than a question, that privilege. For Jody Harrison.
Yes, ma'am.
Perhaps the nationally accredited chaplaincy provides you the foundation for your beliefs in your testimony here. But the Baptist doctrine is Christ-centered.
Yes.
Its purpose is not to go around trying to defend this or that. It is to be a disciple and a witness for Christ. That includes the 10 Commandments. That's prayer in schools. It is not a fight for separation between church and state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any other questions or comments? Thank you. Appreciate you.
May I
very much.
respond?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, it's his role.
Democracy.
That's great. This time, Chair calls Steve Swanson, Dan Hinkle, Rocio Fierro Perez, Mark Lugo.
Mr. Chairman, can you clarify for me? I'm confused all the time.
2 minutes on, if you're testifying on one or both bills, it's 2 minutes to testify. We laid them out together, and the testimony will
2
be
minutes, period.
your choice on how you would like to use that 2 minutes within
All right.
relevancy to one or both bills.
I'm going to be like Sherman through Georgia.
All right. That's great. Go ahead. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for this opportunity to testify. I'm opposed to both bills. My name is Dan Hinkle. I'm testifying for myself. There's 2 or 3 things. I'm going to be really quick since I have minimum of time. One is this is a race to the courthouse, both bills, okay? The folks in Louisiana has already passed House Bill 71. They've already went to the district court, federal district court. They've already went to the appellate court. They made their arguments on January 23rd. They haven't got a decision on that yet. And 18 attorney generals have already intervened in that case, including General Paxton. So the litigation part of this is covered. There's no reason for Texas to pass Senate Bill 10 for the simple reason that if they go to the Supreme Court and then there's some changes that need to be made, those kind of things, we get to start over. I know the lieutenant governor was annoyed that we weren't first, but we weren't first. The other part of it is when it comes to Senate Bill 11, that's another race to the courthouse. And here's something else that y'all have to understand when you vote on Senate Bill 11. I want you to look at how you are asking people to waive their constitutional rights in regards to the Establishment Clause, so that you won't have this, you won't have that, you won't have that. That's like a lightning rod, okay? Yeah, you protect yourself when you sign the waiver, but guess what the lightning rod does? It draws a lot of lightning. So there's going to be suits on that. Let me just close by the people that want to say that Baptist, our founding fathers, this, and this. Baptists in the colonial days were the most persecuted religion in this country. May I finish my point?
Last sentence. Thank you.
We had a key role in getting the First Amendment put onto the Constitution. You can Google Baptist and First Amendment, and you are going to be shocked. Freedom of speech so that we could preach, freedom to assemble so that we could actually have our services, freedom to petition our government so that we could actually get permits. Our people were whipped until their blood filled their boots. As a result, we're real
thanks,
sensitive.
Sir. Appreciate your testimony. Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Rocio Fierro Perez. I'm the political director at the Texas Freedom Network.
an organization of parents, young people, faith leaders, and other Texans who support public education and religious freedom. I'm here to testify in strong opposition to SB 10. First, we oppose this bill because it is unconstitutional, a fact made clear when the U.S. Supreme Court 45 years ago struck down a similar requirement to post the 10 Commandments in public schools. That also makes this bill fiscally irresponsible. Texas will waste taxpayer dollars by defending public schools in inevitable lawsuits. We also oppose this bill because it undermines the freedom of families to direct the religious education of their own children. Many Texans and their children are Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, or follow other faith traditions whose sacred scriptures are very different, or their core values are based on any other particular religious beliefs. But in addition to that, this bill actually requires posting a specific Christian version of the 10 Commandments that differs substantially from versions used by many Christians as well as Jews. By favoring one religious perspective over all others, this bill undermines the right of every child, regardless of their family's beliefs, to feel welcome and respected in our public schools. Finally, government cheapens religious faith when it imposes mandates designed to promote it, as this bill does. Matters of faith are best left to families and congregations, not legislation and not public schools. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and members of this board, my name is Mark Lugo. I'm the San Antonio Director for Addis Feed Ministries, also a pastor in my community. Thank you for this time to testify before you today. The fact that we are in this room together and talking about these matters. As a matter of fact, I'm speaking for SB 10 and SB 11. But the fact that we're in this room talking about this lets us all know how far we've gone from the origins of the founding heritage that we have in this nation. And, Proverbs 22:6, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, that he will not depart from it. What are we raising in the state of Texas for the future? And the amazing thing about this bill that's written, it's an option. It's not a forceful bill, just like any other religious freedom in our schools now. That we have, it's optional. A lot of the instructional faith-based organizations are before and after school and during lunch. So this is providing an option. And as a matter of fact, it is very needed to have clarity in this because, as you can see, there is difference of opinions in here. So we're counting on you, senators, to define and clarify what that religious freedom is for us to have in our communities so that we can have something as a foundation to stand on so that we could have that freedom that our country so freely gives us, and it's been given us for many years in our nation, and we want it to continue. Now, the other thing that I want to state to end my time is that, the founding of this nation and our Pledge of Allegiance is one nation under God, and our Texas Pledge is also Texas under God. And that is the first and foremost thing that we have to remember as we move forward with this bill.
Thank you. Members, questions? Appreciate each of you. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Steve Swanson. I'm here as a grandparent, a retired engineer, and a business executive, and a 30-year volunteer in public education. And I'm grateful to be here talking about prayer and words that were written thousands of years ago for us to live by. I'm here on the bill, on both bills. My encouragement, I've given you a handout. I hope you have a chance to read it. It has some words that were written guiding our life. And my encouragement is that before legislation, we read these words and we talk about displaying these words in our lives so our kids see them. Don't just read them. And Senator Parker's reference to the bewilderment of what's going on in our communities. I think we need to focus beyond the schools and outside our school doors and in our communities and above to share these words and have them come alive and then offer them to our children for them to learn no matter where they're at.
That's great. Members, any comments? Appreciate your testimony, each of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair calls Jonathan Sines, Taylor Fox, Tara Schulte.
I think there's one or two other people.
If you could, please tell us your name.
Tara Schulte.
Tara Schulte. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. My name is Tara Schulte. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Defending Freedom. And today I'm here to testify in favor of SB11 and its critical importance in protecting students' rights to religious expression within our public schools. This bill is not about imposing religion, but about ensuring that every student can freely and voluntarily exercise their constitutional right to prayer. Senate Bill 11 represents a fundamental defense of our First Amendment rights in an era where many feel religious expression is being marginalized or even attacked. This bill sends a powerful message. Students should never feel ashamed or prohibited from expressing their personal faith. And contrary to misconceptions, this bill is not about favoring one religion over another. It's about creating inclusive spaces where students of all faith backgrounds, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and others, can feel comfortable expressing their beliefs. By explicitly protecting students' rights to pray, we're acknowledging the rich religious diversity in our communities. In today's high-stress educational environment with bullying, gender confusion, suicide, emotional and mental health on the rise, prayer can be a critical tool for emotional healing. So, Senate Bill 11 recognizes that education isn't just about academic knowledge, but it's about supporting the whole child, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. This bill fundamentally respects the rights of parents and students to make their own choices about religious expression. No student will be compelled to pray, and no student will be prevented from praying. By supporting Senate Bill 11, we're not just passing legislation, we're affirming a fundamental American principle that every individual has the right to express their faith freely and without fear of discrimination or marginalization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Creighton, honorable members of the committee, my name is Jonathan Sines. I'm the attorney and president of Texas Values. Texas Values is the largest faith-based nonprofit Christian law and policy organization in Texas. We have supporters in all 254 counties of the state, and I've been involved in this work for over 20 years. And just about every religious freedom law that's been passed or discussed in the state of Texas, we've been a part of or led the effort to pass. I've also been licensed to practice law in the state of Texas for over 20 years, and I've litigated cases oftentimes on religious liberty. It's fair to say that I know it fairly well, and some may consider me an expert on this issue. I'm here to testify in favor of Senate Bill 11, but I also submitted a witness card in favor of Senate Bill 10 as well. I learned in law school that the law is a teacher. What we say in state law is okay and legal, matters a lot, and has impact on what people decide to do. It's very often a function of this legislative body to take what Supreme Courts have said and then put them in the state law. And I can assure you that when we do that, that ends up being more likely that the law will be followed and that Supreme Court decision will be honored. Without that next step of putting into state law what we've learned from the Supreme Court, like the Kennedy versus Bremerton case, We'll often see school districts and other bodies, local governments, say they're not sure what the law is, they're not sure what the Supreme Court has said. And just to give you an example, we passed a law in 2013 to protect Christmas in public schools. There was litigation almost every year, and even in Plano and other places for decades. After we passed a state law on that went into effect. I think there's been one lawsuit since then, and that was one that we had to bring, and it lasted, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks. And it ended up having the law protected. And also, if you're not sure about that, just look at what happened to Coach Kennedy. If I could finish my sentence, Mr. Chairman.
Finish your point. Thank you.
At what happened to Coach Kennedy. In the very school district where he won at the U.S. Supreme Court, and they were ordered to pay millions of dollars in attorney's fees, they themselves did not want to follow what the Supreme Court wanted them to do. And they created such a hostile environment that Coach Kennedy had no choice but to leave that community and go to another state. Please don't allow that to happen here in the state of Texas. Taking this step that you're taking, an important step, and putting it into state law will ensure that religious freedom is protected, and I guarantee you will decrease the likelihood of litigation.
Thank you. Appreciate that, members. Any comments, questions for our last witness today, Mr. Sines? Thank you. Okay, members, that wraps up our public testimony on Senate Bill 10 and 11. Senate Bill 10 and 11 are now pending. We'll move on to voting on pending business from last week and today. Members, I think we have everyone here. The chair lays out